Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Remember, the stage isn't just a platform. It's a gateway to truth. Cass Anderson's voice carried across the auditorium of Riverside Preparatory School, where 20 students sat scattered among the first few rows, scribbling notes in their journals. The afternoon light filtered through high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams that fell across the worn stage floor. She paced the edge of the stage, her heels making familiar clicks against the wooden boards. The sound always reminded her of her own performances years ago when she'd lived for the moments before the curtain rose. In The Glass Menagerie, every character wears a mask. Your job isn't just to wear that mask. It's to show the audience what lies beneath it. Andrew Mitchell's hand shot up, his lean frame practically vibrating with enthusiasm. Like in the scene where Tom talks about the magic show. He's not really talking about magic at all, is he? A smile tugged at Cass's lips. Andrew had that rare gift, the ability to see past the surface to the heart of a scene. Excellent observation. Who else caught that subtext? Lisa Rodriguez raised her hand tentatively. It's about escape, isn't it? The same way Tom goes to the movies to escape his life at home. Perfect. Cass grabbed a piece of chalk, adding to the growing web of themes and connections on the blackboard she'd wheeled onto the stage. Now let's dig deeper. When Tom describes the magic show, pay attention to his word choice. The next hour flew by as they dissected the scene. Cass watched her students come alive, their initial hesitation giving way to passionate debate about character motivations and hidden meanings. This was why she loved teaching these moments when literature became more than words on a page, when she could help young minds unlock the deeper truths buried in the text. As the bell rang and students began gathering their things, Cass noticed Andrew lingering behind, clutching his well-worn script. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been up late studying his lines again. "Ms. Anderson?" He approached the stage, shoulders slightly hunched, a habit she'd been trying to help him break for his portrayal of Tom. "I was practicing that monologue you assigned, the one from Act 3, but something feels off. Would you mind watching it once?" Cass glanced at her phone, 3 missed calls from Matthew already. The fertility clinic appointment wasn't for another 2 hours, but he'd wanted to discuss their strategy over lunch first. Still, she couldn't ignore the plea in Andrew's eyes. Of course. She sat in the front row, giving him her full attention. "Whenever you're ready." Andrew took his position center stage, closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he was transformed. His posture shifted, taking on the weight of Tom's guilt and restlessness. But as he launched into the monologue, Cass could see what was troubling him. "Stop," she called gently after the first few lines. "You're thinking too much about the words. Remember what we discussed about living in the character's truth? Tell me what Tom is feeling in this moment." Andrew's brow furrowed. "He's defensive, right? Trying to justify leaving his sister. Deeper. What's beneath the justification?" "Guilt," Andrew said slowly. "And fear?" "Fear that he's becoming his father." "Exactly." Cass stood, climbing back onto the stage. "Now, before you start the monologue again, I want you to think about a time you had to choose between what you wanted and what someone else needed from you. Hold that feeling in your chest. Let it color every word." She demonstrated the first few lines, showing how the emotion could thread through the subtext without overwhelming it. As she spoke, she felt the familiar thrill of performance tingling through her veins, the same feeling she'd been trying to ignore since Rachel had mentioned the summer theater program. Andrew watched intently, then tried again. This time, the words flowed naturally, raw emotion bleeding through his careful diction. When he finished, the empty auditorium seemed to ring with truth. "That," Cass said quietly, "was beautiful." "Really?" His face lit up. "It felt different this time. Like I wasn't just saying the words, I was living them," she finished. "That's what separates good acting from great acting. Finding the universal truth in the particular moment." The door at the back of the auditorium creaked open, and John Collins stepped in, his messenger bag slung across his shoulder. He'd been doing that more often lately, finding reasons to pass by during her rehearsals. "Sorry to interrupt," he called, his voice echoing slightly in the space. Just needed to check the calendar for the spring performances. Wouldn't want to schedule the English department poetry slam at the same time. Cass felt a flutter of something in her stomach. Awareness, maybe. John had a way of looking at her that made her feel seen, not as Mrs. Anderson, the reliable theater teacher, but as Cass, the woman who once dreamed of bigger stages. "We're just finishing up," she said, turning back to Andrew. "Practice holding on to that feeling we found today. Tomorrow we'll work on." Her phone buzzed again. Matthew's name flashed on the screen, along with a text. "Where are you? We need to talk before the appointment." The flutter in her stomach turned to lead. She could already picture the conversation. Matthew's carefully rational arguments about timing and biological clocks, his spreadsheets tracking optimal fertility windows, his subtle reminders about how her mother's death had destabilized her career ambitions. "Ms. Anderson," Andrew's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you okay?" She realized she'd been staring at her phone, her free hand pressed against her stomach as if warding off a blow. Both Andrew and John were watching her with concern. "Fine," she managed, forcing a smile. "Just lost track of time." "Great work today, Andrew." "Really? You're going to make an amazing Tom." As Andrew gathered his things and headed out, John lingered. "You know," he said, his voice casual but his eyes intent, "the faculty lounge got a new coffee maker. Actually makes a decent espresso now. If you ever want to grab a cup between classes." The invitation hung in the air, weighted with possibility. Cass found herself imagining conversations about literature and theater, someone who might understand her passion for the arts, who wouldn't dismiss her dreams as, "I should go," she said quickly, gathering her notes and shoving them into her bag. "My husband's waiting." John nodded, accepting the rejection with grace. But as Cass hurried past him, she caught a whiff of his cologne, something woodsy and warm that made her think of autumn nights and new beginnings. She rushed through the door before she could analyze the thought too closely that I in the hallway. She nearly collided with Rachel, who was emerging from a meeting room with a stack of administrative files. "Whoa, where's the fire?" Rachel steadied her, then got a good look at her face. "Oh, Matthew, I'm late for lunch." He wants to strategize before the appointment. Rachel's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "Strategize? You're trying to have a baby, not launch a military campaign? Try telling him that." Cass ran a hand through her hair, disrupting the careful styling she'd done that morning. "Sometimes I think he approaches everything like one of his investment portfolios, all about maximizing returns and minimizing risks." "And what about what you want?" The question hit too close to home. Cass adjusted her bag, avoiding Rachel's knowing gaze. "What I want is to not have this conversation right now. I'll call you later." But as she walked away, she could feel Rachel's eyes on her back, and she wondered if her friend could see what she'd been trying so hard to hide, that with every step toward Matthew's carefully planned future, she felt another piece of herself slipping away. The school parking lot was nearly empty, most teachers having left for lunch. Cass's blue Prius sat alone in her usual spot, the afternoon sun making the hood gleam like water. As she approached, she caught her reflection in the driver's side window. A woman in her early 30s, dressed in a sensible pencil skirt and blazer, her dark hair starting to escape its professional updo. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a respected teacher, a devoted wife, a future mother. Why, then, did she feel like an actress playing a role she hadn't chosen? She slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the car immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened the browser, typing quickly before she could lose her nerve. New York Summer Theater Program. The search results loaded, full of promises and possibilities. Her finger hovered over the link to the application page, then Matthew's latest text arrived. "If you're not here in 15 minutes, we'll have to reschedule." Again, Cass closed the browser, started her car, and pulled out of the parking lot. But as she drove toward the restaurant where Matthew waited, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was exiting stage left from a scene that wasn't finished yet. At Rachel's office always reminded Cass of a magazine spread. Everything precisely arranged, from the symmetrical placement of photos on the walls to the geometric patterns of her desk accessories. Even the afternoon light seemed to fall exactly where Rachel wanted it, highlighting her assistant principal's nameplate like a spotlight on a carefully curated stage. 10 minutes, Cass said, hovering in the doorway. "That's all I can spare." Rachel looked up from her computer, her dark waves falling perfectly around her face. Close the door. Something in her friend's tone made Cass obey, despite her better judgment. Rachel had that effect on people, a quiet authority that made even simple requests feel significant. Sit. Rachel gestured to the leather chair across from her desk. When Cass remained standing, she sighed. Cassandra Anderson, park your theatrical behind in that chair before I come over there and make you. The use of her full name, a throwback to their college days, drew a reluctant smile from Cass. She sat, dropping her bag beside the chair. Happy? Ecstatic? Rachel opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. The cream-colored paper looked expensive, embossed with a logo that made Cass's heart skip. Now, before you start with the excuses, just listen. Rachel, what did I just say about listening? Rachel leaned forward, her expression intense. Do you remember sophomore year, when we did that awful experimental production of Waiting for Godot? Cass couldn't help laughing. You mean when the director decided we should perform in complete darkness except for handheld flashlights? And you saved the whole thing by convincing him to let you redesign the lighting concept the night before opening. Rachel's eyes softened with memory. You stayed up all night working on it. I found you asleep on the catwalk at dawn, surrounded by lighting diagrams. I was younger then, more foolish, more alive, Rachel corrected. More you. That's the Cass I remember, the one who wouldn't let anyone else's vision limit her own. The one who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to reach for it. Cass stared at her hands, noticing how tightly she'd laced her fingers together. People change. They shouldn't have to. Rachel pushed the envelope across the desk. The New York Summer Theater Program. 3 months working with professional directors, designing experimental productions, teaching masterclasses. It's perfect for you. It's impossible. But Cass's fingers were already reaching for the envelope, tracing the embossed letters. Why? Because Matthew won't like it? Because it doesn't fit into his 5-year plan for your uterus? That's not fair. No. What's not fair is watching my best friend disappear piece by piece. Rachel stood, coming around the desk to perch on its edge. When was the last time you performed? Really performed, not just demonstrated techniques for your students? The question stung because Cass knew the exact answer. 2 years, 4 months, and 13 days ago. A community theater production of The Winter's Tale. She'd played Hermione, standing like a statue on stage until the moment of awakening. Matthew had attended one performance, checking his phone throughout. The application deadline isn't for a month, Rachel continued, her voice gentler. Just take it home. Think about it. And what am I supposed to think about? Abandoning my students? Putting my marriage on hold? Running away to New York like some teenage dream? How about thinking about what you want for once? Rachel reached out, covering Cass's clenched hands with her own. I see you, Cass. Every day. I watch you pour your heart into teaching these kids to follow their dreams while you bury your own. You're not happy. I'm content. Content. Rachel's laugh was sharp. Content is what you settle for when you're too afraid to be happy. You deserve more than contentment. Before Cass could respond, a knock at the door made them both jump. John Collins stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. Something flickered across his face as he took in the scene. Rachel's hand on Cass's, the tears Cass hadn't realized were threatening to fall. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his voice careful. Rachel, do you have that curriculum outline we discussed? Rachel straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. I'll email it to you. But John didn't leave. His eyes found Cass's, dark with concern. Everything okay? Cass wiped quickly at her eyes, fighting for composure. Fine. Just end-of-term stress. Right? He didn't sound convinced. Well, if you need anything, the offer hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. After he left, Rachel gave a low whistle. That man has it bad for you. Don't start. Cass gathered her things, shoving the envelope in her bag before she could think too hard about it. I have to go. Matthew's waiting. He's always waiting, isn't he? Rachel's voice stopped her at the door. Always expecting you to fit into his schedule, his plans, his life. When was the last time he waited for you to be ready for something? The question followed Cass down the hallway, echoing with uncomfortable truth. Her phone buzzed again. Another missed call from Matthew. The fertility clinic appointment loomed ahead like a deadline she wasn't prepared to meet. Did I in the parking lot? She passed John again. He was leaning against his car, apparently absorbed in grading papers, but she felt his gaze follow her to her vehicle. The weight of his attention should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. The envelope from Rachel seemed to pulse in her bag like a second heartbeat. She thought about the woman she'd been in college. Fearless, ambitious, burning with creative energy. The woman who would have jumped at this opportunity without a second thought. When had she stopped being that woman? When had she started measuring every decision against Matthew's expectations? Her phone rang again. This time, she let it go to voicemail, sitting in her car as the afternoon sun slanted through the windshield. After a moment, she pulled out the envelope and opened it. The program details were even more incredible than Rachel had suggested. Guest lectures from Broadway directors. Workshops on experimental staging techniques. A chance to direct an original production in an off-Broadway venue. Everything she'd ever dreamed of, and at the bottom of the page, in Rachel's elegant handwriting. Remember who you are. Cass traced the words with her finger, feeling something crack open in her chest, something that had been sealed away for too long. Possibility. Hope. Fear. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from Matthew. Where are you? We need to discuss our strategy before the appointment. Strategy. As if having a baby was a business proposition. As if their entire marriage hadn't become an exercise in strategic planning. She started the car, the envelope burning a hole in her bag. She had choices to make, and for the first time in years, she wasn't sure what she would choose. That as she pulled out of the parking lot, she caught a glimpse of Rachel watching from her office window. Her friend raised a hand in farewell, or perhaps blessing. The road ahead split in two directions. The direct route to the restaurant where Matthew waited, and the longer way that would take her past the old community theater where she'd last performed. Without consciously deciding, she found herself turning toward the theater, just a small delay. A moment to breathe. To remember, she didn't notice the dark sedan that pulled out behind her, keeping a careful distance as she drove. The Harvest Moon restaurant was Matthew's kind of place. All clean lines and muted colors, where even the water glasses seemed designed to make minimal noise when set down. He'd already ordered for both of them, Cass discovered as she slid into the seat across from him. A salad for her, his usual steak for himself. You're late, he said, not looking up from his phone where he was presumably checking stock prices. Again, I had a student who needed help. Cass unfolded her napkin, trying to ignore how the crisp white fabric reminded her of hospital sheets. Andrew's really making progress with his. Did you bring the ovulation charts? Matthew finally looked at her, his blue eyes sharp behind his designer glasses. He'd gotten them last month, claiming they made him look more authoritative to his clients. To Cass, they just made him look more like his father. She reached in her bag, fingers brushing past Rachel's envelope to find the medical folder. Dr. Parker said we don't need to track quite so intensively. It can actually increase stress, which Dr. Parker isn't a fertility specialist. Matthew took the folder, flipping it open with the efficiency he brought to everything. That's why we're seeing Dr. Winston today. He's the best in the state. His success rates are... I know his rates. Cass picked up her water glass, wishing it was something stronger. You show me the spreadsheet. 3 times. A muscle twitched in Matthew's jaw. I'm trying to be thorough. One of us has to be. The accusation hung between them like smoke. Cass set her glass down carefully, remembering Rachel's words about contentment versus happiness. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're not taking this seriously. Matthew leaned forward, lowering his voice the way he did when he was trying to be reasonable. You missed 2 temperature readings this week. You've been late to 3 appointments. And now I hear you're thinking about some summer program. Cass felt her spine stiffen. How did you? Rachel's assistant mentioned it to my secretary. Were you planning to tell me? I only just got the application today. But even as she said it, Cass knew it was the wrong answer. She should have said she wasn't considering it. Should have dismissed it as Rachel's well-meaning but misguided suggestion. An application you're not going to fill out? Matthew's tone made it clear this wasn't a question. We have a plan, Cass. A timeline. 3 months in New York doesn't fit into that timeline. Our timeline. Your plan. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Matthew sat back, studying her like she was one of his investment prospects showing unexpected volatility. I thought we agreed on this. Marriage, house, kids. That was the plan. You said, I know what I said. 2 years ago, standing in their new house's empty living room, still dizzy with grief from her mother's death. She'd agreed to anything then, desperate for stability, for something to hold on to. But maybe we need to be flexible. Maybe, like you were flexible after your mother died. His voice was gentle now, concerned. The tone he'd used during her breakdown, when she'd spent 3 days in bed, unable to face the world. Remember what Dr. Winston said about stress and its effects on fertility. If you're feeling overwhelmed, I'm not overwhelmed, but her hands were shaking as she reached for her water. I'm just saying we could consider throwing away everything we've worked for. Consider putting your theater fantasies ahead of our family. The gentleness vanished from his voice. You're not 20 anymore, Cass. It's time to grow up. Before she could respond, their food arrived. Her salad artfully arranged, his steak perfectly cooked. Matthew immediately began cutting his meat into precise squares, the way he did everything. Methodically, purposefully, with no room for spontaneity or doubt, they ate in silence, the restaurant's soft music failing to fill the void between them. Cass pushed lettuce leaves around her plate, remembering another dinner, years ago, when they'd first started dating. They'd gone to a cheap Italian place, and Matthew had gotten sauce on his tie. He'd laughed then, really laughed, his head thrown back, eyes crinkled at the corners. When was the last time she'd seen him laugh like that? We should go, he said finally, checking his watch. Dr. Winston doesn't like to be kept waiting. The fertility clinic occupied the top floor of a sleek medical building, its waiting room decorated in soothing shades of blue and green. Everything designed to project calm, control, success. The magazines on the coffee table all featured glowing mothers and peaceful babies. No mess, no complications, no doubt. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson? The nurse's smile was professional, practiced. Dr. Winston will see you now. The examination room was cold despite its warm color scheme. Cass sat on the paper-covered table, the crinkle of movement too loud in the quiet space. Matthew took the chair beside her, already pulling out his notebook where he tracked every test, every result, every possibility. Dr. Winston swept in, tall and distinguished in his white coat. How are we doing today? We, Cass thought. Always we. As if her body were a joint venture, a shared investment opportunity. The charts show some irregular patterns. Matthew began before she could speak. I've noticed a correlation between her temperature variations and her work schedule. If we could optimize, actually, Cass interrupted, her voice stronger than she expected. I've been having some doubts. The room went still. She could feel Matthew's shock without looking at him. Doubts are natural, Dr. Winston said smoothly. Many women feel anxiety about, not anxiety. Cass gripped the edge of the examination table. Doubts. About timing. About readiness. About everything. She wanted to say, about who I am and what I want and whether I'm losing myself in all these charts and plans and expectations. I see. Dr. Winston glanced at Matthew, then back to Cass. Perhaps we should discuss some counseling options. I could recommend someone who specializes in fertility-related stress. I don't need counseling. Cass stood abruptly, the paper crinkling beneath her. I need... What? Time? Space? Permission to want something different? I need to go. Cass. Matthew's voice was tight, with controlled anger. Don't do this. Not here. But she was already grabbing her bag, already moving toward the door. Behind her, she heard Dr. Winston saying something about hormone levels and anxiety medications. Heard Matthew's measured response about her history of emotional instability. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, the exit sign glowing like a beacon. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. Matthew, then Rachel, then Matthew again. She turned it off, needing silence, needing space to think. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. She should go home, she knew. Should face Matthew, apologize, get back on track with their carefully planned life. Instead, she found herself turning toward Oakwood Forest, the narrow road that Matthew hated, especially after dark. But it would get her home faster, away from his disappointment, his concern, his suffocating plans for her future. She didn't notice the gathering darkness, or the way the trees seemed to reach for her car with shadow fingers. Didn't notice the vehicle that had been following her since the clinic, keeping a careful distance. All she could think about was escape. Oakwood Forest lived up to its name at twilight. Ancient oaks lined the narrow road, their branches forming a canopy that turned the fading daylight into deeper shadow. Cass's headlights carved a tunnel through the growing darkness, illuminating patches of fog that clung to the asphalt like ghostly fingers. She'd driven this road hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. The familiar curves seemed sharper, the shadows deeper, the silence more complete. Or maybe it was just her state of mind, raw from the confrontation at the clinic, that made everything feel slightly wrong. The envelope from Rachel still lay in her passenger seat where she'd tossed it. Even in the dim light, the prestigious letterhead seemed to glow with possibility. 3 months in New York. 3 months of freedom from Matthew's charts and schedules, from his careful plans for her future. 3 months to remember who she used to be. That a deer bounded across the road, startling her from her thoughts. Cass swerved slightly, her heart racing. The forest pressed closer, trees looming in her peripheral vision like watching figures. She reached for the radio, needing noise to fill the oppressive silence. But only static crackled through the speakers. That's when she saw the hazard lights blinking ahead. They pulsed in the fog like warning signals, marking where a car had pulled onto the narrow shoulder. A dark sedan, expensive-looking, even in the poor light. As Cass drew closer, she could make out a figure standing beside it, illuminated intermittently by the flashing lights. A woman. She stood perfectly still, one hand resting on the car's hood, the other hanging at her side. Something about her posture made the hair on the back of Cass's neck rise. "Stop," said one voice in her head. "She might need help." "Keep driving," said another, deeper voice. "Something's wrong." Cass's foot hovered over the brake pedal. Through her passenger window, she caught the woman's eye. The stranger's face was partly hidden in shadow, but Cass could have sworn she saw a flicker of recognition there. Which was impossible, wasn't it? The moments stretched like taffy, time seeming to slow as Cass struggled with her decision. The Good Samaritan in her, the teacher who couldn't bear to see someone in need, urged her to stop. But something more primitive, more instinctive, screamed danger. In the end, instinct won. Cass pressed the gas, her Prius accelerating past the stranded vehicle. In her rearview mirror, she watched the hazard lights grow smaller, pulsing like a heartbeat in the darkness until they vanished around a bend. "I'll call roadside assistance," she promised the empty car, trying to quiet her guilt. "As soon as I get home, or the police. Someone should check." But she didn't finish the thought, because in that moment, her headlights swept across something that made her blood run cold. Another car, parked deeper in the shadows, its engine off but a cigarette's red glow visible through the driver's window. Cass's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Had that car been there when she passed the woman? She hadn't noticed it, but she'd been so focused on the stranded driver. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of shadows and racing thoughts. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her shirt was damp with sweat despite the car's air conditioning. The house loomed before her, dark and silent. Matthew wouldn't be home yet after her scene at the clinic. He'd probably gone back to the office to work late, as he always did when he was angry inside. Cass went through her usual routine on autopilot. Keys in the bowl by the door, shoes on the rack, bag on the kitchen counter. The envelope from Rachel slid out onto the granite surface, a cream-colored reminder of possibilities and escape. She should call someone about the stranded motorist. But as she reached for her phone, doubt crept in. What exactly would she report? A woman standing by her car? There was nothing criminal about that. And the second car? Had she really seen it? Or had her imagination conjured it from shadows and fears? "You're being paranoid," she told her reflection in the kitchen window. The words echoed in the empty house, not as reassuring as she'd hoped. Unable to settle, she paced the living room, her sock-clad feet silent on the hardwood floors. Matthew had chosen every piece of furniture in this room, each item carefully selected to project success and stability. The leather sofa they never really sat on. The abstract paintings whose meanings he'd explained to her in detail. The baby grand piano she'd once played. Before he'd suggested she focus on more practical pursuits, her phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from Matthew. Staying at the office late. We'll talk tomorrow. Please take your medication, the medication he'd insisted she keep taking after her mother's death, even when she'd said she felt better. The pills that made everything slightly fuzzy, slightly distant, like watching her life through gauze. Another buzz. Rachel this time called the clinic. Are you okay? Want me to come over? Cass started to reply, but something stopped her. A sound from outside a car, door closing. She moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. The street was empty except for her Prius and the usual parked cars of her neighbors. But there, at the edge of her vision, movement, a shadow that seemed darker than the others. She stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. The house suddenly felt too big, too full of corners and hidden spaces. She checked the locks twice, then retreated to her home office. The one room Matthew hadn't decorated. The one space that still felt fully hers. Her laptop glowed to life. She should look up the number for roadside assistance or the police non-emergency line. Should report what she'd seen, just in case. But instead, her fingers typed out different words in the search bar. Jane Walters. The name came from nowhere, rising up from some deep recess of her mind. It felt important somehow, though she couldn't say why. The search results loaded slowly, each second stretching like hours. Then, suddenly, her screen went black. The power hadn't gone out. Her laptop was still running. But the display had died, reflecting her own startled face back at her, and behind her reflection, barely visible in the darkened screen, another face seemed to hover, watching, waiting, knowing. Cass whirled around, but the office was empty. Just shadows and silence, and her own ragged breathing. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number, she answered without thinking. Hello? Silence answered her. Not complete silence. She could hear breathing on the other end, soft and measured, like someone trying very hard to control it. Who is this? She demanded. The breathing continued for another moment, then stopped. The line went dead. Cass lowered the phone with trembling fingers. She didn't want to be alone in the house anymore, but she couldn't face Matthew either. Not tonight. Not after everything. Rachel, she thought. She could go to Rachel's. Her friend would understand, would let her stay without too many questions, but as she gathered her things to leave, her laptop screen flickered back to life. The search results for Jane Walters filled the display. And there, in the first result, was a fresh news article that made her blood turn to ice. Local woman found dead in Oakwood Forest. Police seeking information. The article was dated tomorrow morning. Morning arrived like a blow to the head. Harsh sunlight streaming through windows Cass hadn't remembered to close. She'd spent the night in her office chair, afraid to sleep, afraid to move, watching the news article about Jane Walters' update in real time. As dawn approached, the victim's photo showed a woman in her early 40s, smiling professionally at the camera. Something about her seemed familiar, tugging at the edges of Cass's memory, but the connection stayed just out of reach. The article mentioned she'd been found by a jogger at sunrise, on the same stretch of Oakwood Forest Road where Cass had seen the stranded car, where she'd driven past without stopping. Cass barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up, her body rejecting the reality of what she'd done or failed to do. The tiles felt cold under her knees as she knelt there, trying to piece together the fragments of the night before, the car with its blinking hazard lights. The woman standing beside it, her face half hidden in shadow. The second vehicle lurking in the darkness. And now, a dead body on the same road. It might not be connected, she whispered to her reflection in the bathroom mirror. But the woman staring back at her looked haunted, her eyes dark with sleeplessness and guilt. She touched her ear automatically, a nervous habit, and froze. Her earring was missing, not just any earring, one of the pair Matthew had given her on their first anniversary. Simple gold hoops, expensive but understated like everything he chose. She'd been wearing them yesterday. She was sure of it. Had been wearing them at the clinic during their fight during the drive. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number this time. She let it go to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Same number done on the third ring, she answered. Hello. Silence answered her. Then breathing soft and measured, like someone trying very hard to control it. Just like last night. Who is this? Her voice cracked. What do you want? The breathing continued for another moment, then stopped. The line went dead. Cass lowered the phone with trembling fingers. On the screen, notifications competed for her attention. 3 missed calls from Matthew, 5 texts from Rachel, 1 voicemail from an unknown number, breaking news alert. Police seek witnesses in Forest Road death sheet. Open Rachel's text first. Are you okay? Matthew's worried. Call me when you can. Seriously. Where are you? Just saw the news about that woman. Wasn't that near your house? We need to talk. It's important. The last message had come through just minutes ago. As Cass stared at it, 3 dots appeared, indicating Rachel was typing more. Then they vanished. Matthew's texts were more direct. We need to discuss your behavior at the clinic. Doctor Winston is concerned about your stability. I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Harris for this afternoon. Don't be late. Dr. Harris, her old psychiatrist. The one who'd prescribed the medication after her mother's death. The one who'd supported Matthew's assertion that her desire to return to acting was a symptom of emotional instability. That Cass's hands shook as she got dressed, choosing clothes on autopilot. One of the conservative outfits Matthew had helped her select for work. The morning news played in the background, filling the house with artificial noise to keep the silence at bay. Police are asking anyone who may have been in the Oakwood Forest area between 7 and 9 p.m. last night to come forward, the reporter was saying. The victim, Jane Walters, was well known in local business circles. The name triggered something in Cass's memory. She'd heard it before recently. But where? Her phone buzzed again. Rachel. Hey, Cass answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Sorry I didn't call back. Don't go to the police. Rachel's voice was tight with tension. Whatever you think you saw last night, whatever you think you know, don't report it. Cass's blood ran cold. How did you know I saw something? A pause. Matthew told me you took the Forest Road home. After what happened to the clinic, I was worried. I never told Matthew I took that road. Another pause, longer this time. Cass, listen to me. You're not well. We all see it. The paranoia, the mood swings, the bizarre behavior at the clinic. Let Matthew take you to Dr. Harris. Let us help you. Us. The word felt like poison on her tongue. Since when are you and Matthew a team? That's not. I didn't mean. Rachel took a breath. Look, can you come to my office? We should talk in person. About what? About Jane. About everything. Rachel's voice softened. Please, Cass. Trust me. Trust. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. I need to check something first, Cass said. I'll come by later. She ended the call before Rachel could respond, already grabbing her keys. She had to know. Had to be sure. The drive to Oakwood Forest took 10 minutes in morning traffic. Police tape marked the spot where Jane's body had been found, the same spot where Cass had seen the stranded car, where she'd made the choice to drive past. She parked a safe distance away, watching police photographers document the scene. And there, just beyond the tape, something caught the morning light. Something small and gold, her missing earring. Cass's hands trembled as she picked it up, the metal warm from the sun. It was definitely hers. She could see the tiny scratch on the clasp from where she'd caught it on a sweater last month, but that was impossible. She'd been wearing both earrings last night. She was sure of it. Wasn't she? Back home, she ran to her jewelry box. The matching earring lay exactly where it should be, gleaming innocently in its velvet Nest Point 2 identical earrings. When there should only be one pair, her phone rang again. Unknown number this time. When she answered, there was no breathing. Instead, a voice she almost recognized whispered 3 words. Check your email. The line went dead before she could respond. Her laptop chimed with a new message notification. The sender was unknown, but the subject line made her heart stop. Matthew and Rachel. What you need to know. The email contained a single image, a security camera photo showing 2 people in an intimate embrace. Even in the grainy resolution, she could make out Rachel's perfect waves, Matthew's designer glasses. The timestamp was from last night, during the hour she'd been driving through Oakwood Forest. Everything Cass thought she knew began to unravel, like a sweater coming apart from a single pulled thread. But before she could process what she was seeing, another email arrived. This one was from Jane Walters, sent a week ago to Rachel's personal email address. The subject line read, "I know what you did." Cass stared at her screen, pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. The mysterious calls, the second car in the forest, Rachel's strange behavior, Matthew's insistence on controlling her medication, her schedule, her life. Her phone rang one final time. Unknown number, but this time, when she answered, she knew exactly who would be on the other end, and she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that nothing in her carefully planned life would ever be the same. The security footage played on Cass's laptop screen, a grainy tableau of betrayal caught in black and white. She'd watched it 14 times now, analyzing every detail. Rachel's hand on Matthew's chest, his fingers tangled in her hair, their bodies pressed together in the shadows of Rachel's office. The timestamp blinked steadily in the corner. 8:47 p.m. exactly, when Cass had been driving through Oakwood Forest, got a knock at her classroom door, made her slam the laptop shut. Andrew stood in the doorway, script in hand, concern etched on his young face. "Ms. Anderson, we missed you in first period." Cass forced her hands to steady. "Sorry about that. I wasn't feeling well this morning. Are you okay? You look—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Different. Just tired." She managed a smile that felt like cracked glass. "Did you need something?" Andrew stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "It's about the scene we were working on. The one where Tom confronts his mother about the gentleman caller." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I've been thinking about it differently since I saw the news." "The news?" Cass's throat went dry. "About that woman they found. Jane Walters." Andrew's voice dropped. "My mom knew her. They were in the same book club. And the weird thing is, Mom says Mrs. Walters came to their last meeting really upset. She kept saying someone was following her, but nobody believed her." The air in the classroom suddenly felt too thin. "When was this?" "Last week. Mom said Mrs. Walters had discovered something about someone at her company. Something bad." Andrew clutched his script tighter. "It's kind of like in the play, isn't it? How people don't believe Laura when she tries to tell them about Jim's engagement. How sometimes the truth is right there, but everyone chooses to ignore it." Before Cass could respond, her phone buzzed. "Rachel, Andrew, I need to take this. We'll work on the scene tomorrow?" "Okay." He nodded, but lingered at the door. "Ms. Anderson, if you ever need someone to believe you, if you ever need to talk." The offer hung in the air, innocent and profound. Cass felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, Andrew. That means a lot." After he left, she answered the phone. "What do you want, Rachel? Where are you?" Rachel's voice was sharp with concern. "Matthew's been trying to reach you all morning. He says you never came home last night." "I was home." Cass opened her laptop again, staring at the frozen image of her husband and best friend. "Just not when he was—" A pause. "What's that supposed to mean? You tell me." Cass's voice was steadier than she felt. "You seem to know an awful lot about my movements lately. About which roads I take home, about my appointments, about my mental state. Because I care about you." Rachel's frustration crackled through the line. "We all do. That's why Matthew scheduled the appointment with Dr. Harris. You need help, Cass. After what happened at the clinic, did Jane Walters need help too?" The silence that followed was deafening. When Rachel spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming careful, measured. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking why a woman who supposedly discovered something about your company ended up dead on the same road where I saw her stranded last night." "You saw?" Rachel took a sharp breath. "Cass, listen to me very carefully. You're not well. You're having another episode like after your mother died. Remember how confused you were then? How you thought people were watching you? I remember you and Matthew convincing me I was crazy. Convincing me to take medication that made everything fuzzy. Made me easier to control. To help you." Rachel's voice rose. "Everything we did was to help you." "Everything who did, Rachel?" "You and Matthew." Another pause, longer this time. "Come to my office. Please. We can talk about this properly, face to face, like Jane Walters came to talk to you. Don't." The word was sharp, almost frightened. "Don't say things you can't take back." The classroom door opened again, but this time it was John Collins who stepped through. He took one look at Cass's face and stopped, concern darkening his eyes. "I have to go," Cass said into the phone. "Wait, just promise me you won't do anything rash. Don't talk to anyone until we've had a chance to explain. Goodbye, Rachel." She ended the call, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. John moved closer, his footsteps quiet on the classroom floor. "Bad news?" he asked softly. Cass laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You could say that. Want to talk about it?" She looked up at him, really looked. John had always seemed solid, dependable. But then, she'd thought the same about Rachel once. "What do you know about Jane Walters?" she asked abruptly. Something flickered across his face, recognition. "Concern? The woman they found in Oakwood Forest?" "Not much, except—" He hesitated. "Except what?" "Except that she came to see me last week. She was looking for information about Rachel Martinez. About certain irregularities in the school's financial records." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that could end careers. Get people arrested." John moved closer, lowering his voice. "The kind that might make someone desperate enough to silence a threat." Cass's laptop chimed with a new email. Unknown sender, but she recognized the subject line from deep in her memory. Riverside Prep financial audit discrepancies found. "I should have come to you sooner," John said, watching her face. "But I didn't know who to trust. And after what happened to Jane, why tell me now?" His eyes met hers, steady and serious. "Because you're the only other person who's noticed something's wrong. I've seen it in your face these past few weeks. The way you look at Rachel sometimes, like you're seeing something the rest of us are missing." The laptop chimed again. Another email, this time from Matthew's account, but sent last week. "Before any of this started, we need to deal with Jane. She's not backing down." Or says she has proof that Cass's world narrowed to a single, terrible point of clarity. All the pieces were there, had been there all along. Rachel's strange behavior, Matthew's controlling concern, Jane's death, the mysterious calls. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number this time. When she answered, a familiar voice spoke. "Check the second drawer of Rachel's desk. The one she keeps locked. You'll find what Jane found." The line went dead, but Cass didn't need to hear more. She knew what she had to do. "John," she said, closing her laptop with trembling fingers. "I need your help." The hallway to Rachel's office felt longer than usual, each step echoing like a countdown. John walked beside Cass, his presence steady but alert. They'd waited until after the final bell, when most of the staff had left for the day. "Are you sure about this?" John's voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Once we look in that drawer, there's no going back." Cass touched the duplicate key in her pocket, the one she'd had made years ago when Rachel first gave her emergency access to the office. "I'm already past the point of no return." They rounded the corner and nearly collided with Andrew, who was hurrying in the opposite direction. The boy stumbled back, clutching his backpack. "Ms. Anderson, Mr. Collins." His eyes darted between them. I forgot my—" "Andrew." Cass studied his flushed face. "What are you really doing here?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I overheard something. In Ms. Martinez's office. She was arguing with someone on the phone about financial records and you." John stepped closer. "What exactly did you hear?" "She said something about dealing with Cass the same way we dealt with Jane. Then she saw me in the doorway and hung up." Andrew's voice shook slightly. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but after what my mom said about Mrs. Walters," Cass exchanged a look with John. "Where's Rachel now?" "She left about 10 minutes ago. Said she had an appointment." "Andrew, go home," John said firmly. "If anyone asks, you didn't see us here." After the boy left, they moved quickly to Rachel's office. The key slid into the lock smoothly, but Cass's hands trembled as she turned it. The office looked different in the fading afternoon light, more threatening somehow, its familiar contours twisted by shadow and betrayal. Cass went straight to Rachel's desk while John kept watch at the door. The second drawer was locked, but the spare key worked here too. Inside, she found a thick manila folder labeled Audit Findings Confidential. "John," she called softly. "Look at this." He joined her as she spread the documents across Rachel's desk. Financial statements, bank records, emails, and something else. A series of photographs showing Rachel and Matthew together, dating back months. Years. They've been planning this for a long time, John said, examining a bank statement. Look at these transfers. Small amounts, spread out over years, all going to offshore accounts. But why? Cass's voice cracked. Rachel's salary as assistant principal. Matthew's investment firm. They both make good money. Greed's never about need. John held up an email chain. According to this, they've been embezzling from the school's endowment fund. Jane must have discovered it during her audit. And now she's dead. The words hung in the air like smoke. Just like I'll be if they realize I know. We need to go to the police. With what proof? These documents? Cass gestured at the scattered papers. They'll just say I broke into Rachel's office and planted them. After my episode at the clinic. Who would believe me over them? Her phone buzzed Matthew. Don't answer it, John warned, but Cass was already hitting the accept button. Hello? Where are you? Matthew's voice was tight, with controlled anger. Dr. Harris has been waiting for half an hour. I'm not coming to the appointment. A pause. Cass, you're not well. After what happened with Jane? What had happened with Jane, Matthew? Did she threaten to expose your affair with Rachel? Or was it the money that worried you? The silence that followed was deafening. When Matthew spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming smoother, more reasonable. You're confused, sweetheart. Like you were after your mother died. Remember how frightened and paranoid you felt then? How you imagined conspiracies that weren't real? Stop gaslighting me? The words came out stronger than she felt. I saw the security footage of you and Rachel. I found Jane's emails. I know about the embezzlement. Another pause. In the background, Cass heard a door close, footsteps on hardwood. Where are you really, Cass? A chill ran down her spine. She looked at John, mouthing, He's at our house. Tell me where you are, Matthew continued, his voice dangerously soft. Let me help you. Like I helped you after your breakdown. Remember how lost you were then? How grateful you were for the medication. The medication that had made her doubt her own mind. That had made her pliable, controllable. I remember everything now, she whispered. Every lie. Every manipulation. Did you and Rachel plan it from the beginning? Was anything real? Everything I did was for your own good. His voice hardened. Everything I'm about to do is for your own good too. The line went dead. Seconds later, her phone lit up with a text from Rachel. Check your email. Now, with trembling fingers, Cass opened her inbox. The newest message contained a single video attachment. The thumbnail showed her car on Oakwood Forest Road, passing Jane's stranded vehicle. They were following me that night, she breathed. The second car I saw. They plan it all. We need to get out of here. John started gathering the documents. If they're willing to kill once. A noise in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps, growing closer. The other door, John whispered, pointing to the connecting door that led to the teacher's lounge. Quick! They had just made it through when Rachel's office door opened. Through the crack beneath the connecting door, Cass saw familiar shoes enter the office. Rachel's expensive heels, clicking on the hardwood. It's done. Rachel's voice drifted through. The video's been sent. Once she sees it, she'll know we can prove she was there that night. That she left Jane to die. A man's voice responded. Not Matthew's, but one Cass recognized with a jolt. Detective Lawson, the officer investigating Jane's death. And you're sure this will work? He asked. Trust me. Rachel's smile was audible in her voice. By the time we're finished, everyone will believe Cass killed Jane in a paranoid delusion. After all, she has a history of mental instability. And with her fingerprints on these documents, the sound of shuffling papers made Cass's blood run cold. She looked down at the scattered documents they'd been examining, suddenly realizing their mistake. They hadn't been discovering evidence. They'd been leaving it that John's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing once. A question, a promise, Cass squeezed back. She knew what they had to do next, but first, they had to survive the next 5 minutes. The teacher's lounge had never felt smaller than in those endless minutes, crouched in darkness while Rachel and Detective Lawson discussed her fate. Cass pressed herself against the wall, John's steady presence beside her the only thing keeping her from screaming. We should search the building, Lawson was saying. If she accessed these files, she might still be here. No need. Rachel's voice dripped confidence. I know exactly where she'll go next. home, to confront Matthew. She's always been predictably dramatic that way, and Matthew will handle it. He's had plenty of practice managing her episodes. Rachel's laugh made Cass's skin crawl. By morning, she'll be safely committed to a private facility, experiencing another tragic breakdown. Like mother, like daughter, Lawson's amusement was clear. Exactly. Speaking of which, did you take care of the security footage from that night? Deleted from the system. Though you might want to talk to your IT guy, Jones. He asked some pointed questions about the gap in coverage. I'll handle Jones. Their voices moved toward the door. As soon as it clicked shut behind them, Cass sagged against John, her legs barely supporting her weight. My mother, she whispered. They made me think, Cass. John's voice was urgent. We can't stay here. They'll have people watching your house, expecting you to go home. Where else can you go? Home. The word sparked a memory Andrew's voice from earlier. My mom knew her. They were in the same book club. I know where we need to go. Cass straightened, her mind racing. But first, we need to talk to Jones in IT. If he questioned the deleted footage, it's risky. If Rachel gets to him first, then we need to get to him now. They moved carefully through the darkened school, taking back corridors to avoid the main offices where Rachel might still be. The IT department was in the basement, a maze of server rooms and cluttered workspaces that always smelled faintly of coffee and electronics that Jones's office light was still on. Through the window, they could see him hunched over his computer, frowning at something on the screen. Cass knocked softly, but he jumped, spinning toward the door. Ms. Anderson? Mr. Collins? What are you? We need to talk about the security footage from the night Jane Walters died. Cass said without preamble, the color drained from Jones's face. I don't know what you are, please. Cass stepped closer. I know you noticed something wrong with the system. Something that made you question Rachel. Jones glanced between them, then at his computer screen. It wasn't just that night, he said finally. There's been a pattern. Short gaps in coverage, always around the same times Rachel stays late. I thought it was a system glitch at first, but then I found this. He turned his monitor toward them. On the screen was an email chain between Rachel and Matthew, dating back months. They didn't just delete footage. They altered financial records, backdated documents. I've been tracking the changes, building a record of a door slammed somewhere above them. Jones immediately closed the email window. You need to leave. He reached under his desk, pulling out a USB drive. Everything I found is on here. But Ms. Anderson, be careful. This goes deeper than you think. The school board, the police, how many people are involved? Enough to make sure you disappear if they catch you. He pressed the drive in her hand. Get somewhere safe. Don't use your phone or credit cards. Don't trust anyone who footsteps on the stairs made them all freeze. Go, Jones hissed. There's a maintenance exit through the server room. I'll stall them. They slipped out just as voices echoed down the hallway. Through the closing door, Cass heard Jones greeting someone with forced cheerfulness. The maintenance exit led to a small parking lot behind the school. Cass's car was still in front, too exposed to risk retrieving. We'll take mine, John said, leading her to his sedan. But we can't keep it long. They'll be looking for it. As they pulled out of the lot, Cass saw Rachel's BMW turning into the school entrance. In the passenger's seat sat Detective Lawson. Where are we going? John asked once they were safely away from the school. Andrew's house. His mother knew Jane was in her book club. If Jane discovered something about Rachel and Matthew's scheme, she might have confided in the other members. And you trust Andrew? Cass thought of the boy's earnest face, his intuitive understanding of truth and deception. Yes. And more importantly, I don't think Rachel knows about his connection to Jane. Not yet. Her phone buzzed Matthew again. This time, the text made her blood freeze. Found your application to the New York program. Shame if the police discovered you'd been planning to flee the country after killing Jane. Come home now, and we can handle this privately. Make me come find you, and everything gets very public. Another text followed immediately. By the way, your mother didn't really commit suicide. But no one will question if you do. John glanced at her white face. What is it? My mother. Cass's voice shook. They killed her. Made it look like she couldn't finish. Cass, listen to me. John's voice was steel. We're going to prove everything. The embezzlement, Jane's murder, what they did to your mother. But first we have to survive the night. They turned onto Andrews Street, just as Cass's phone lit up with an incoming email. The subject line made her stomach lurch. Security contract duplicate signed by C. Anderson. They're framing me, she whispered, making it look like I hired someone to kill Jane. Like I'm having another breakdown and killing people during blackouts. Why now? Why go to all this trouble? Because of Jane. She must have found proof of what they did to my mother. Cass stared at the phone in her hand. And now they'll do the same to me? They parked a block from Andrew's house, approaching on foot through carefully maintained suburban gardens. But as they neared the house, something made Cass grab John's arm. Wait! She pointed to a car parked across the street, Detective Lawson's unmarked police vehicle. They got here first. Through Andrew's front window, they could see figures moving inside. Rachel's distinctive silhouette, Matthew's broader frame, and Andrew's mother, gesturing animatedly as she talked. They're questioning her about Jane, Cass realized. About what Jane might have told the book club. We need to warn her. No. Cass's grip tightened on John's arm. Look. Andrew appeared in his upstairs window, holding something up to catch their attention. A piece of paper with hastily scrawled words, back door. Hurry. I have proof. The back door of Andrew's house opened silently into a mudroom cluttered with sports equipment and rain boots. Andrew stood waiting, finger pressed to his lips, his face pale in the dim light. Quick, he whispered, motioning them toward the basement stairs. They can't hear us down there. The basement was a finished rec room, walls lined with bookshelves. Andrew locked the door behind them and pulled a thick, leather-bound journal from behind a row of textbooks. This was Mrs. Walters's, he explained, hands trembling slightly. She gave it to Mom at their last book club meeting. Said to keep it safe. Why didn't your mother turn it over to the police? John asked. Andrew's expression darkened. Because Mrs. Walters said not to trust them, especially not Detective Lawson. She said he was involved in covering up a death 2 years ago. My mother. Cass breathed upstairs. They heard footsteps moving across the ceiling. Rachel's voice drifted down, muffled but distinct. We just want to make sure Jane didn't say anything concerning during your last meeting. Andrew's mother's reply was too quiet to make out, but Rachel's next words came through clearly. If you're protecting Cass Anderson, you should know she's not well. She's having another breakdown. Cass opened Jane's journal with shaking fingers. The early entries were mundane book club notes, daily observations. But then, dated 3 months ago, found discrepancies in Riverside Prep Audit. RM accessing endowment fund through shell companies. Connected to MA investment firm. Deeper investigation needed. 2 weeks later, evidence of previous cover-up. Death ruled suicide, but autopsy inconsistent. LA paid off? Connection to current fraud? And finally, the day before she died, they know I know. Are watching me. Meeting CA tonight, must warn her. Everything in safe deposit box, 274. Key with TJ, Cass muttered. Jones, the IT guy. Ms. Anderson. Andrew's voice was urgent. There's something else you need to see. He pulled out his phone, opening a video file. I've been recording their conversations whenever they meet in Ms. Martinez's office. Usually it's just boring school stuff, but yesterday, the video showed Rachel's office filmed through a partially open door. Rachel sat at her desk, Matthew standing beside her. Once Cass is committed, her inheritance transfers to me, Matthew was saying. The house, the trust fund her mother left everything. And the school board won't question the missing funds once we provide evidence of her mental breakdown, Rachel added. They'll assume her accusations are paranoid delusions. Just like they did with her mother when she started asking questions about the missing scholarship money. Matthew's laugh was cold. Like mother, like daughter. A creak from upstairs made them all freeze. Footsteps on the basement stairs. Hide, Andrew hissed, shoving the journal back behind the books. The doorknob rattled. Andrew? His mother's voice. Are you down there? Just a second, Mom. Andrew called, gesturing frantically for Cass and John to hide behind the large entertainment center. I'm changing. Detective Lawson has some questions for you, honey. About Mrs. Walters. Cass held her breath as Andrew opened the door. Footsteps entered more than just his mother's. Quite a setup you have down here, Detective Lawson said. His shoes appeared in Cass's limited view. Good place to hide things. Or people. I don't know what you mean. Andrew's voice was admirably steady. No. Rachel's heels clicked on the floor. Then you won't mind if we take a look around? Rachel. Matthew's voice now, from the stairs. We have another problem. Jones is gone. Cleared out his office. Took everything. What? Rachel's heel stamps were sharp with anger. Find him. Now. Already on it. But there's more. He accessed the security footage archive before he left. Downloaded everything. A pause. Then Rachel's voice turned silky. Andrew, sweetie, if you know where Ms. Anderson is, now would be a very good time to tell us. Before things get unpleasant. Leave him alone. Andrew's mother's voice shook. He's just a child. A child who's been recording private conversations, Matthew said. Haven't you, Andrew? We found your little hiding spot by Rachel's office. I don't. Andrew's protest cut off with a sharp intake of breath. Stop. His mother cried. You're hurting him. Cass started to move, but John held her back, his grip iron. Last chance, Rachel said softly. Where is Cass Anderson? A new voice spoke from the stairs. Right here. Everyone turned. Cass's heart stopped. Jones stood at the top of the basement stairs, his laptop under one arm. Behind him, uniformed police officers filed down the stairs. Sorry I'm late to the party, Jones said. Had to make a few stops first. Evidence lockup. The DA's office. Oh, and Mrs. Anderson's old safe deposit box. The one you thought you'd cleaned out, Matthew. Turns out Jane wasn't the only one keeping records. You don't understand, Rachel began, but Jones cut her off. I understand perfectly. Just like Jane did. Just like Cass's mother did. He held up a USB drive. Everything's here. The embezzlement. The bribes. The murders. And now, attempted assault of a minor. Real police are very interested in all of it. Real police? Lawson's hand moved toward his gun. I wouldn't, one of the uniformed officers said. Internal Affairs has some questions about certain suicide investigations. In your offshore accounts? Cass stepped out from behind the entertainment center, John beside her. Matthew's eyes locked onto her, and for the first time, she saw his mask completely drop. The cold calculation in his gaze made her shiver. You really should have taken your medication, darling, he said softly. None of this would have happened if you'd just stayed manageable. Like my mother. Cass's voice was steel. Is that how you managed her? Drugged her until she couldn't fight back, then staged her suicide when she started asking questions. We did it for you, Rachel said, her composure cracking. Everything was for you. You were so lost after your mother died. We gave you structure, purpose. You gave me lies. Cass turned to the officers. I want to make a statement. About everything. But as the officers moved to make arrests, Matthew's hand slipped into his pocket. Cass saw something metallic glint in the basement's dim light. No one's making statements, he said, his voice deadly calm. Not now. Not ever. The basement air crackled with tension as Matthew revealed the gun, its surface catching the dim light. The police officers reached for their weapons, but Matthew's next words stopped them cold. I wouldn't, he said, his voice carrying the same measured tone he'd used to discuss investment strategies over dinner. My finger's already on the trigger. One wrong move, and my dear, unstable wife finally succeeds in following her mother's example. Matthew, Rachel started, but he cut her off. Quiet. His eyes never left Cass. You've ruined everything. Years of careful planning, all undone because you couldn't just take your pills and play your part. Like my mother refused to play hers. Cass took a step forward, ignoring John's attempt to pull her back. Tell me the truth. For once in our marriage, tell me what really happened. A cold smile curved Matthew's lips. She was like you, too curious, too emotional, too invested in other people's problems. When she found the discrepancies in the scholarship fund, she actually thought she could expose us, as if the board would believe her over their trusted financial advisor. So you killed her. We gave her a choice. Matthew's gun hand was perfectly steady. Take the pills, stop asking questions, let me handle her affairs. She refused, became hysterical, started making accusations. His smile widened. It was really quite convenient when she had her accident. You drugged her, Cass whispered. Made it look like suicide. And then you arrived, so perfectly broken by grief. So willing to accept my help, my guidance, my medication. He tilted his head. Did you never wonder why the pills made you so compliant? So easy to convince that your suspicions were just paranoia. One of the officers spoke. Put the gun down, Mr. Anderson. It's over. Is it? Matthew's gaze swept the room. Rachel, show them what's in your bag. Rachel hesitated, then opened her designer purse. Inside was a stack of papers, documents, photos, USB drives. Insurance, Matthew explained. Every corrupt judge, every bought officer, every compromised board member. One call, and it all goes public. How many careers would that end? Detective Martinez? The officer who'd spoken stiffened. Cass saw the family resemblance to Rachel in his features, in the way he held himself. You're bluffing, Detective Martinez said, but uncertainty tinged his voice. Am I? Matthew's free hand pulled out his phone. One text and every major news outlet gets copies. Your choice. Let us walk out of here, or watch everything burn. Wait. Jones stepped forward, laptop still in hand. Before you make that call, you should know I already sent everything to the FBI. Not local law enforcement, not the DA's office. Federal agents. They're probably walking into your office right now. Matthew's composure cracked. Just for a second. You're lying. Check your work email, Jones said. The one you use for the shell companies. You should have gotten a notification about unusual access. Right about now. Matthew's phone buzzed. As he glanced at it, his grip on the gun wavered. That was all the opening John needed. He launched himself forward, tackling Matthew as Cass screamed a warning. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Rachel shrieked. Andrew's mother pulled him behind a bookshelf. In the chaos, Detective Martinez moved to help his sister, but Jones blocked his path. Make a choice, Detective. The right one this time. The basement erupted into motion. Officers swarming forward. Rachel trying to run. Matthew and John struggling for the gun. Cass saw it all, as if in slow motion. Matthew's finger tightening on the trigger again. John twisting to shield her. The second shot, but it was Rachel who cried out, clutching her shoulder where the bullet had found her instead of its intended target. She stared at Matthew in shock, betrayal written across her face. You promised, she gasped. You said no one would get hurt. Like you promised, Jane? Cass asked quietly, that Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted. She was going to expose everything. The embezzlement, yes, but also what happened to your mother. She'd found proof. Records we thought we'd destroyed. Where? Safe deposit box, Rachel whispered. The key. Jones has it. We tried to intercept him, but that's enough. Matthew's voice was ice. He'd managed to keep hold of the gun, using John as a shield. No one's asking questions anymore. We're leaving. Now. But as he backed toward the stairs, Andrew's voice rang out. Mrs. Walters asked the same questions, didn't she? About what happened to Ms. Anderson's mom. That's why you had to stop her. Matthew's grip on John tightened. Shut up, you little. She came to the book club that night. Andrew continued, still hidden behind the bookshelf. Showed everyone the proof she'd found. The real autopsy report. The medication records. Everything. Cass saw the moment Matthew's control finally shattered. His face contorted with rage as he shoved John aside, raising the gun toward Andrew's hiding place. I won't let some child ruin everything. 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Matthew stumbled, red blooming across his chest. Behind him stood Detective Martinez, his service weapon raised. Like the boys said, Martinez growled. Enough questions. As Matthew fell, his phone clattered to the floor. On its screen, a message flashed, FBI investigation notice. Your accounts have been frozen. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Officers securing the scene. Rachel being handcuffed, still crying about promises and betrayal. Jones downloading files that would expose everything. Andrew hugging his mother, both shaken but alive, and John pulling Cass into his arms, his heart beating strong against her cheek. It's over, he murmured. You're safe. But as paramedics worked to save Matthew's life, Cass caught his final whispered words. You'll never be safe. There are others. She looked at the evidence scattered across the basement floor. Documents, photos, Jane's journal, USB drives full of secrets. So many threads leading to other conspirators, other crimes, other victims. This wasn't over. Not yet. John, she said quietly. I need your help with something else. He met her eyes, understanding immediately. The others? She nodded. We have to find them all. For my mother. For Jane. For everyone they've hurt. We will. He squeezed her hand. But first, we need a plan. Cass looked at the allies gathered around her. Jones with his technical skills, Andrew with his quick mind, even Detective Martinez choosing justice over family loyalty. They had evidence, resources, and most importantly, the truth. Now they just had to survive long enough to expose it. 3 days after the shooting in Andrew's basement, Cass sat in her classroom, staring at the empty seats. Yellow police tape still crossed Rachel's office door. Matthew remained in critical condition, under armed guard at County General. The local news had run wild with headlines about embezzlement, murder, and conspiracy at Riverside Prep, but something felt unfinished that a knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. John entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a thick manila envelope. You look like you haven't slept, he said, setting a cup on her desk. Have you seen the latest report? Cass pulled up an email on her laptop. They're calling it an isolated incident. Matthew and Rachel acted alone. Case closed. But you don't believe that. Matthew's last words about others being involved. He wasn't bluffing. She opened the manila envelope John had brought. What did Jones find? Transfer records. John spread out documents across her desk. Every time money moved through the school's endowment fund, it passed through a series of shell companies. Different names, different banks, but always the same pattern, and always the same signatures authorizing the transfers. Cass noted, examining a document. Board members, judges, people with power, people who'd want to keep their involvement quiet. John's voice hardened. People who might arrange accidents for anyone asking too many questions. The classroom door opened again. Andrew slipped in, looking over his shoulder before closing it. You were right, he said without preamble. I went through Mom's book club records like you asked. The night before she died, Mrs. Walters didn't just show up with evidence about your mother's death. She had a whole list of suspicious deaths going back years. Cass leaned forward. What kind of deaths? All ruled suicides or accidents. All connected to people who'd questioned financial irregularities at different institutions, schools, charities, government offices. Andrew pulled out his phone. I recorded Mom talking about it. Listen. He played an audio file. His mother's voice came through clearly. Jane was terrified that night. Said she'd uncovered something bigger than just school fraud. Called it the network, powerful people helping each other hide money, silence whistleblowers. Said they had judges in their pocket, police on payroll. That's why she gave me her journal instead of going to authorities. The network, John mused. That matches what Jones found in the encrypted files from Rachel's computer. Communications between members, all using code names and routing through secure servers. How many people are we talking about? Cass asked. At least 30 confirmed members in positions of power. Maybe more. John ran a hand through his hair. The question is, how do we expose them without ending up like Jane? Or your mother? We don't, a new voice said. They all turned. Detective Martinez stood in the doorway, his expression grim. You need to stop digging, he said, entering and closing the door. This goes higher than you realize. The FBI agent who was supposed to investigate found dead in his hotel room this morning. Apparent suicide. Apparent? Cass's voice was sharp. 2 shots to the back of the head. Martinez's smile was bitter. Very determined suicide, wouldn't you say? Why are you telling us this? John moved slightly in front of Cass. You were part of the cover-up? I was part of a lot of things I'm not proud of. Martinez pulled out his badge, setting it on Cass's desk. Family loyalty made me help Rachel. But what they did to your mother, to Jane, there has to be a line. There is, Cass said quietly. And they crossed it long ago. Her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. Stop looking. Or join them. They're watching us, Martinez warned. Probably have been since the basement. You need to disappear. Now. No. Cass stood, anger finally overwhelming fear. I'm done running, done hiding, done letting them bury the truth along with their victims. What are you suggesting? John asked. We set a trap. She turned to Martinez. You said they're watching. Let's give them something to watch. Something they can't ignore. Like what? Like me. Go to the media with evidence of their crimes. She held up her hand as they all started to protest. Not the real evidence that stays safe with Jones. But we leak enough to make them nervous. Make them think I'm going to expose everything. They'll try to kill you, Martinez said bluntly. Exactly. But this time, we'll be ready. She looked at John. Remember what you said about having a plan? He nodded slowly. You want to fake your death. Make them think they've won. While the real evidence goes to every major news outlet, federal agency, and watchdog organization in the country, Andrew added, catching on. They can't kill a story that's already out there. It's too dangerous, Martinez argued. These people, they're not amateurs like Rachel. They're professionals. If they realize you're setting them up, then we better make it convincing. Cass pulled up a blank document on her laptop. Tell me everything you know about their methods, how they plan their accidents, how they cover their tracks. As Martinez began to talk, Cass felt a strange calm settle over her. This was what she'd been trained for, not just as a teacher, but as an actor. One final performance with the highest stakes imaginable. What about Matthew? John asked quietly. If he recovers, he won't help them, Martinez said. Man like that, facing prison? He'll make a deal, try to save himself. They know that, which means they'll target him too, Cass realized. We need to move fast. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Final warning. Walk away or join them on the ground, Cass showed them the message. They're getting nervous. Good. Not good, Martinez corrected. Desperate people make mistakes, but they're also more dangerous. Then we better not make any mistakes ourselves. Cass opened Jane's journal, studying the names and dates. Andrew, I need you to get your mother's book club records, everything from the past 5 years. John, work with Jones on the digital trail. Detective Martinez, just Martinez now. He reminded her, gesturing at his discarded badge. Martinez, I need everything you know about their cleanup crews. How they stage accidents, how they handle evidence, all of it. As they began planning, Cass glanced at the classroom window. A black sedan sat across the street, its windows tinted. Watching. Waiting, let them watch, she thought. Let them think they know what's coming. They had no idea the hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. Cass walked between two uniformed officers, her steps echoing on the polished floor. Through the windows of the ICU, she could see Matthew, still unconscious, tubes and wires connecting him to softly beeping machines. 5 minutes, one of the officers said, unlocking the door. That's all the DA authorized. I understand. Cass entered the room, letting her hand shake visibly as she approached the bed. Let them see her fear. Let them think she was falling apart. The network's observer would be watching. They always were. She sat beside Matthew's bed, taking his limp hand in hers. I know you can hear me, she said, loud enough for anyone listening. I found the files, Matthew. All of them. Everything about the network, about what you did to my mother. She let her voice break. I'm going public tomorrow. It all comes out. A nurse paused outside the window, adjusting her cap. Not a real nurse. Cass had studied the staff rotations with Martinez. This one was here to observe, to report back. Ms. Anderson, the guard tapped his watch. Time's up. In the parking lot, John waited in his car, engine running. How did it go? Message delivered. Cass checked her phone, 3 missed calls from unknown numbers already. They took the bait. Now we wait. The plan was simple in theory. Let the network think she was about to expose everything. Let them plan their accident. But be ready when they moved. Jones's voice crackled through their earpieces. Activity on their secure channel. They're calling an emergency meeting. Location? Martinez asked from his surveillance position across the street. Private room at the Capitol Club. 9 p.m. Perfect timing. Cass looked at her watch. The press conference is scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning. They'll have to move tonight. That's what worries me, John said, pulling into traffic. A black SUV, immediately fell in behind them. We're betting everything on predicting their move. Not betting. Knowing. Cass touched the recording device hidden in her necklace. Matthew talked about their methods in the basement. Martinez confirmed their patterns. When they eliminate threats, they follow a script. Scripts can change, Martinez warned through the earpiece. Stay alert. They drove to Cass's house, the place the network would expect her to go. As she unlocked the front door, her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Anderson. A smooth, cultured voice. I represent certain interested parties. I believe we could reach an arrangement beneficial to everyone. You mean like the arrangement you had with my mother? A pause. Your mother was unfortunate, as was Ms. Walters, but mistakes were made at lower levels. I'm offering you a seat at the table, a chance to be part of something bigger, part of a conspiracy of murderers, part of a system that maintains order, stability. The voice hardened slightly. The alternative would be regrettable. Go to hell. She hung up, hands trembling not entirely in act this time. Inside the house, John checked the security system while she made a show of gathering files into her briefcase. They're watching, he said quietly, indicating the vehicles parked along the street. At least 4 teams. Good. Cass raised her voice slightly. I need to shower and change before meeting with the reporters. Can you check the backup files already? John played his part. Everything's set for the morning. No one can stop the truth now. As Cass climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Jones's voice came through her earpiece. Meeting starting at the club. 12 attendees, all high-level network members. They're discussing options. Keep monitoring, Martinez said. The kill order will come from them. Cass entered her bedroom, leaving the lights off. In the darkness, she could see more vehicles arriving on her street. More watchers taking position. Her phone buzzed with a text. Final offer. Take the deal or face the consequences. She typed back. I choose consequences. Movement, Martinez reported. 2 teams breaking off, heading toward the house. Jones, what's happening at the club? Order just came through. They want it to look like wait. Jones's voice changed. Something's wrong. They're getting reports of police movement near the club. FBI too. That's not possible, Martinez said. We didn't involve any agencies. Could they have been tipped off? A new voice cut through their earpieces, familiar, cold, controlled. Did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan? Cass froze. Matthew? Hello, darling. Her husband's voice was stronger than it had been in the basement, all pretense of weakness gone. Surprised? You shouldn't be. The network doesn't just protect its own. It plans for every contingency. You were unconscious, John said. The doctors were on our payroll like half the hospital staff. Matthew's laugh was sharp. Did you think we'd let a valuable asset like me sit helpless in a hospital bed? Everything since the basement has been theater, your kind of theater, Cass. And you played your part beautifully. Through her bedroom window, Cass saw teams of armed men emerging from the vehicles below. Not network assassins, professional soldiers. You led us right to them, Matthew continued. All your little conspirators gathered together so nicely. Martinez, the traitor. Jones, the whistleblower. Even young Andrew and his mother, loose ends. All of them. And now, explosions rocked the night. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The Capitol Club, Martinez breathed. They're eliminating their own people. Cutting ties, cleaning house, Matthew corrected. Starting fresh. And you, my dear wife, gave us the perfect cover story. The desperate widow, driven mad by paranoid delusions, taking violent revenge on imagined conspirators. More vehicles were arriving. Unmarked vans, tactical teams. Jones? Cass called. Andrew? Martinez? Static answered. Don't worry, Matthew said softly. They won't suffer. Much. The bedroom door burst open. Armed men swarmed in, weapons raised, but Cass was already moving. Yes, armed men flooded her bedroom. Cass dug for the hidden panel in her closet floor, the one she'd installed the day after the basement shooting. Her fingers found the latch just as hands grabbed for her. Don't damage her, Matthew's voice commanded through their radio. She needs to be presentable for her suicide scene. The panel swung open, and Cass dropped into the narrow space between walls. Years of theater training made her movements swift, silent. She heard the men above shouting, searching. "She's in the walls." Someone fired, bullets punching through drywall. I said, "Don't damage her." Matthew's rage crackled through their comms. "Find her." Cass pressed her hand to her earpiece. "Jones? Andrew? Anyone?" Static, then a burst of noise. "Little busy." Jones's voice was breathless. "They hit my location, but I had a backup plan. Broadcasting everything now, the meeting at the Capitol Club, Matthew's confession, all of it. Live stream to every major news outlet." Hope flared. "The evidence? Safe. Better than safe viral." Andrew's Mother's Book Club ladies are surprisingly good at social media. They've been sharing Jane's journal entries for the past hour. Trending on Twitter. A crash above as the tactical team began tearing up floorboards. Cass moved carefully through the wall space, following the path she'd memorized. Just like blocking a scene. "Hit your marks. Time your moves." "Martinez," she whispered. "Right here." His voice was strained. "They caught me off guard, but I got out. John's with me. We're coming to you." "No." Cass reached another panel, this one leading to the garage. "Stay back. Matthew will expect that. We're not leaving you. I'm counting on it." She allowed herself a grim smile. "But first, I need you to make a call." Above, she heard Matthew's voice, closer now. "Tear this place apart. Find her." Cass eased the panel open, slipping into the garage. Her old theater trunk sat waiting, exactly where she'd positioned it 3 days ago. Inside, everything she needed for her final performance, her phone vibrated a text from an unknown number. "Clever girl. But how long can you hide?" She typed back. "Long enough." "Sir," one of the tactical team members called out. "Movement in the garage." Of course, Matthew's laugh was cold. The garage, where this all started, with her mother's convenient accident. Footsteps approached. Cass took a deep breath, remembering her mother's face, remembering Jane's courage, remembering every victim of Matthew's network. The garage door burst open. Armed men poured in, weapons ready. "Really, Cass?" Matthew stepped through last, immaculate in his suit despite his supposed hospital stay. "Did you think you could outmaneuver me? I've been playing this game since before you knew it existed." Cass stood slowly, hands raised. "No more games, Matthew. Finally, wisdom." He gestured to his men. "Take her. Carefully. We need to stage this properly. Like you staged my mother's death. She gave us no choice. Just like you're giving us no choice now." He stepped closer, reaching for her face. It's almost poetic. Mother and daughter, both unable to accept their roles. Both meeting tragic ends. Cass let him touch her cheek. Let him see the fear in her eyes. "You're right about one thing." "Oh, this is poetry." She smiled. Exit, pursued by Bear. The garage door exploded inward. Not the main door, the back wall, where she'd had Martinez weaken the structure days ago. As Matthew's men turned toward the noise, tactical teams burst in, but not Matthew's teams. These wore FBI jackets. Federal agents. The lead agent's voice boomed. "Everyone down." Chaos erupted. Matthew's men opened fire, but they were caught between two forces. The FBI team at their back and, through the broken wall, local SWAT units led by Martinez. "Kill her," Matthew screamed, reaching for his own weapon. "Kill them all." But Cass was already moving, diving behind her theater trunk as bullets flew. She heard John's voice shouting her name, heard Matthew cursing as his men fell. "It's over," Martinez called. "Your network is exposed. Look." He held up his phone, showing live news coverage. The Capitol Club in flames. Network members being led away in handcuffs. Social media exploding with Jane's evidence, with witness statements, with years of buried truths clawing their way into light. "No." Matthew's composure shattered completely. "No, no, no." He turned his gun toward Cass, his face twisted with rage. "You destroyed everything. You destroyed yourself," she said quietly. I just pulled back the curtain. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Saw John running toward her, Martinez raising his weapon, the FBI closing in, but it was Rachel's voice that stopped Matthew cold. Enough! She stood in the broken wall, arm in a sling, flanked by federal agents. It's done, Matthew. I've told them everything. You betrayed me first. Rachel's voice shook. Jane was my friend. I never wanted her dead. Never wanted any of them dead. You said we were helping people, maintaining order. But we were just murderers. Weak, Matthew spat. You're all weak. He swung his gun toward Rachel. 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Matthew fell, his weapon clattering away. Blood spread across his expensive suit, not from SWAT or the FBI, but from Martinez's perfect shot. That's for Jane, Martinez said quietly. And for everyone else you killed. As federal agents swarmed the garage, John reached Cass, pulling her into his arms. I thought, when the comms went dead, I had to make it convincing. She buried her face in his shoulder. Had to make Matthew think he'd won, make him expose himself. And Rachel turned herself in an hour ago. Martinez joined them, holstering his weapon. Once she saw Jones's evidence going viral, she decided to save herself. Gave up everything. Names, dates, bank accounts. The whole network. Cass looked at Rachel, who stood trembling between federal agents. Their eyes met across the chaos. Decades of friendship, love, and betrayal condensed into a single moment. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. Cass turned away. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Through the broken wall, she could see dawn breaking over the city. News vans were arriving, reporters already going live with the story. Her phone buzzed with messages. Andrew confirming his safety, Jones reporting from his secure location, support pouring in from countless sources. What now? John asked softly. Cass touched her mother's ring, then Jane's journal in her pocket. Now we make sure this never happens again. We find every hidden file, every secret account, every corrupt official. We bring it all into the light. It won't be easy, Martinez warned. There will be others. Other networks, other Matthews. I know. Cass straightened, survivor's steel in her spine. But now they know we're watching. And this time, the curtain stays up. 2 weeks after Matthew's death, Cass stood on the stage of Riverside Preparatory School's auditorium, facing a room packed with reporters, federal agents, and families of the network's victims. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the space where she'd once taught students about truth and performance. My mother believed in justice, she began, her voice carrying to the back row. When she discovered financial irregularities in the school's scholarship fund, she thought exposing the truth was enough. She didn't know she was facing an organization that had turned murder into an art form. In the front row, Andrew sat with his mother, both nodding encouragement. Behind them, Jones worked on his laptop, continuing to unravel the network's digital web. Thanks to Jane Walters' courage and foresight, we now have proof of 37 murders, disguised as suicides or accidents. Thanks to Rachel Martinez's testimony, we have names of over 200 conspirators in positions of power. And thanks to the evidence Matthew Anderson arrogantly preserved, we have the complete financial records of their operation. Martinez, newly reinstated after his role in the takedown, stood at the back with his federal counterparts. They'd spent days processing arrests, seizing assets, unraveling decades of corruption. But this isn't just about numbers, Cass continued. This is about people. Parents, children, friends all sacrificed to maintain what Matthew called order. What he really meant was control. Power. The ability to decide who lived and who died. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another message from Rachel, like the dozens she'd ignored since that night. This time, though, she read it in court today, telling everything. For Jane. For your mother. For all of them. I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope this helps bring peace to their families. The network believed in shadows, Cass addressed the crowd. They thrived in darkness, counting on our fear, our disbelief, our willingness to accept simple explanations for complex crimes. But as every theater person knows, shadows only exist where light doesn't reach. John approached from the wings, carrying a box of files, evidence packages for the prosecutors, assembled from Jane's journals, Jones's digital forensics, and Rachel's testimony. Today, we begin the process of justice. Not just prosecution, but restoration. Every stolen dollar will be traced. Every corrupted official exposed. Every false suicide ruling re-examined. We owe the victims nothing less. A reporter raised his hand. Ms. Anderson, sources say you're declining witness protection. Given that some network members are still at large, aren't you concerned for your safety? Of course. Cass met his eyes steadily. But I learned something from my students. In The Glass Menagerie, they discovered how silence can be a form of violence. How looking away from truth makes us complicit in lies. I won't hide. I won't be silent. And I'm not alone. She gestured to the group gathered on stage. John, Jones, Martinez, Andrew, and his mother, other allies who'd risked everything to expose the truth. The network's power came from isolation. They made each victim feel alone, unbelieved, paranoid. But they didn't count on people connecting, sharing stories, refusing to accept the official narrative. They didn't count on book clubs and IT specialists and teenage theater students who could recognize a stage scene. Another reporter. What about Rachel Martinez? Her testimony has been crucial, but she's still facing charges. Rachel made her choices, Cass said quietly. She'll face the consequences, like everyone involved. Justice doesn't play favorites. After the press conference, Cass found herself back in her classroom. The space felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the memories of betrayal and discovery. Ready to go? John asked from the doorway. The DA wants to review your testimony for tomorrow's hearing. Almost. Cass touched her mother's ring, then Jane's journal on her desk. Just saying goodbye. To the classroom, to who I was when I taught here. The woman who doubted herself, who let others define her reality. She turned to face him. I'm going to take that theater program in New York. I know. His smile was warm. 3 months teaching experimental theater while helping the FBI track down network assets? Sounds perfect for you. Come with me? Try and stop me. He held out his hand. Someone needs to watch your back while you're changing the world. Martinez appeared behind him. Speaking of watching backs, we found something in Matthew's private servers. Lists of potential recruits for the network. People they were grooming, manipulating into position. How many? Dozens. All over the country. The kind of people who think power matters more than people. He handed her a file. We'll need your help identifying their methods, their patterns. This could take years. Good? Cass took the file. Because I'm not stopping until we find them all. Her phone buzzed one last time, a message from Andrew. Mom says Jane's book club is starting a watchdog organization. They're calling it the Light Network. Want to be on the board? Cass smiled, remembering Jane's courage, her mother's determination, all the victims who died trying to expose the truth. Their light wouldn't be extinguished. Not this time. You know what I taught my students about theater? She said to John and Martinez as they left the classroom. That every great performance requires 3 things. Truth, courage, and someone willing to watch closely enough to see what's really happening. And now, Martinez asked, now we perform those roles for real. We watch. We speak. We shine light into shadows until there's nowhere left for corruption to hide. She locked the classroom door one final time, but she didn't look back. The past had taken enough from her. The future, with all its challenges and possibilities, waited ahead. The network had thought they were writing the script of her life, controlling her role, directing her movements, deciding her fate. But they'd forgotten the first rule of theater. The most powerful moments come when an actor breaks character and speaks truth directly to the audience. Now it was her turn to write the script. And this performance was just beginning.